These 64-year-old paintings have just been discovered and they weren't created by humans. We've long believed that other characteristics that separate us, Homo sapiens, from other species is our ability to create art. However, artworks found deep within some Spanish caves have astonished scientists. Why? Because these discoveries mean that we have to think again about our theories of human exceptionalism. Cave art has been found in many parts of the world, and until recently it was always assumed that only we humans created it. Some of the most famous cave art was discovered in the Chavette cave in southern France, and we can be almost certain that this work was produced by Homo sapiens. We know that the art at Chavette was created by Homo sapiens because the cave paintings there have been dated to about 30,000 years ago. At that time, the only hominin or human-like species on Earth was Homo sapiens, so it follows that it must have been these humans who created the stunning wall paintings. Other examples of Stone Age cave paintings were discovered in the Lascaux cave, also in France. On the walls of this cave are some 6,000 images depicting a variety of animals, among them deer, aurochs, and horses. The site also contains pictures of humans alongside images that are abstract. The Lascaux paintings are about 20,000 years old, a little younger than those at Chavette, but both of these sets, along with other cave paintings that have been discovered, were undeniably created by Homo sapiens. They therefore fit in with the theory that humans came from Africa into Western Europe some 45,000 years ago. Yet, there was another species of hominin in Western Europe at the time that Homo sapiens arrived on the landscape, the Neanderthals. In keeping with the prevailing popular image, for many years after the existence of Neanderthals was discovered, it was thought that they were a rather primitive species. They certainly wouldn't have been capable of creating art, or so it was believed. Then, along came some stunning discoveries of cave art at 3 locations in Spain, as reported in the journal Science in February 2018. These particular artworks had been carefully dated using an advanced technique that measures the radioactive decay of uranium as it slowly transforms into thorium. And the unequivocal age of these paintings is no less than 65,000 years. That's at least 20,000 years before the Homo sapiens arrived in Spain. The only beings capable of making such art who were around in this geographical region at that time were thus Neanderthals. So scientists deducted that it must have been our hominin cousins who created the images. All the cave paintings at the 3 sites are, interestingly, abstract in nature. There are Neanderthal handprints, red dots set in patterns and geometric shapes, and Professor Stringer told the BBC that these new discoveries show Neanderthals were certainly able to think symbolically. The finds further narrow any perceived behavioral gap between the Neanderthals and us, the professor asserted. One day in 2010 was foraging for berries with his 2 sons in the backyard of their home in Iowa. As they scoured the land for fruit, John noticed something sticking out of the mud in a dried-up creek bank. Down on his hands and knees, John took a good look at this new discovery. It was big, and that was for sure, but to begin with, he wasn't entirely sure what he was looking at, and then he started to notice patterns. This wasn't just some rock jutting out of the mud, it was something else entirely. As John and his sons started to dig out their discovery, they surely didn't know that they were putting into motion a chain of events that would reveal what life in Iowa was like some 12,000 years ago, and it was all thanks to John noticing the object and announcing, "Boys, that's a bone. That's a really big bone." John had spotted a telltale marrow line on the object. Indeed, it turned out that it was a leg bone from an ancient animal, and it was surely a big animal because the knee joint was around the same size as a soccer ball, but there was even more to come. John kept his discovery relatively quiet. It was on his land, after all, so for the next 2 years he dug on alone, uncovering even more bones in the creek. It was then that he decided to call in help with the excavation and figure out what was going on. By the time John called in the University of Iowa Museum of Natural History, he'd already dug up almost 20 different bones. He had ribs, he had phalanges, he had vertebrae. and they all belong to one of the most intriguing creatures that has ever walked the earth. While looking for berries, John had inadvertently discovered the remains of a woolly mammoth. In fact, he'd done a lot more than that. He'd found one of the biggest treasure troves of mammoth bones that the region had ever seen. In 2012, the archaeological dig started in earnest. What had begun as a family project became something much bigger. Over the next few years, hundreds of volunteers would carefully dig in John's land, and while the first discovery was impressive, by the end of their time there, they'd uncovered something even more epic. In fact, by 2015, bones from 3 different mammoths had been found. While the skeletons are complete, it still remains one of the most important discoveries of Ice Age bones in Iowa, and it gives an intriguing glimpse not just into the lives of the mammoths, but the entire region. Initially, researchers thought that the creatures were discovered were Columbian mammoths. Those creatures roam most of what we now call the United States, and while finding such an abundance of bones would be rare, the chances were that they'd belong to this species. But examination of the teeth of the mammoths that have been found revealed that these are in fact remains belonging to the smaller and much rarer in Iowa woolly mammoth. This makes the find even more interesting, because the stomping grounds of the 2 species of mammoths seem to have very rarely coincided. That means John's discovery could shed light on more than what was first expected. But it's not just the number of bones discovered that make this find so important. It's that they belong to so many different mammoths, and that both large and small bones have been discovered together. It allows archaeologists to paint a detailed picture of the time the mammoths were alive. There are bite marks on some, and because of the proximity of the different bones in the find, it seems that they haven't been moved around too much. The mammoths appear to have died and decayed on the ground before sinking to the resting place in the creek bank. But there's more to the bite marks than just that. They could give a glimpse into the other animals that lived around the time of the mammoth's death. And it's not just the remains of these Ice Age beasts that the paleontologists are interested in either. They're also performing research on soil and plant samples that the volunteers have dug up on John's land. This will allow them to build a bigger picture of the way they lived, which in some ways is far more important than figuring out how they died. For John, though, there are plenty of questions that remain. One of which is what he's going to do with all the bones that have been discovered on his property. He currently has a variety of different mammoth bones just lying in his house. Talking to ABC News, he suggested that when the digging is done, he might need to add another room to his house, a place where he can try his best at putting the different mammoths back together again. Nevertheless, he admitted that he's not entirely sure about the best way to proceed. For the university, though, the research doesn't stop once the bones have been excavated. While John has to ponder what to do with his property, there's a lot more work to be done elsewhere. Underwater drones are exploring shipwrecks below the Gulf of Mexico, and what they've found is incredible. Among many incredible finds, researchers have discovered never-before-seen unidentified shipwrecks located thousands of feet below the surface. That there are so many secrets hidden beneath the ocean is no mystery. That we haven't had the time nor the interest in exploring these secrets also isn't a mystery. However, scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are conducting an expedition to explore the many shipwrecks located in the uncharted water in some of the deepest parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and what they've recorded is beyond fascinating. In order to explore the unknown, researchers use remote-controlled submersive vehicles, discovering never-before-seen details and investigating different shipwrecks on the ocean floor. Located in the most remote, least explored parts of the Gulf of Mexico. Among the discoveries, researchers uncovered German U-boats, as well as pirate vessels believed to date back to the 19th century. Now, using modern technology, experts are trying to learn as much as they can about the histories and fates of these ships, which the ocean claimed in the distant past. Among the discoveries, experts from NOAA found the remains of a tugboat named New Hope, which sunk in a tropical storm in the 1960s. While the ship sank, the Coast Guard luckily saved the crew from going down with the ship. Speaking about the shipwreck of the New Hope, experts from NOAA said, on September 29, 1965, New Hope encountered the strong winds and high seas of Tropical Storm Debbie off the Louisiana coast. With the crew having trouble pumping water out of its hull, the U.S. Coast Guard received a distress call around 1 a.m. and dispatched an aircraft to deploy a backup pump. Also on board, the aircraft was the latest in the search and rescue technology, a floating radio beacon for use with a radio direction finder. In use, the beacon is dropped close to the distressed vessel to mark its position and to act as a drifting reference. The 7-member crew boarded a life raft and abandoned the foundering New Hope at 3 a.m., just as the aircraft arrived to mark its position with the beacon. Staying on the scene until daylight, the aircraft vectored a Coast Guard helicopter to the raft to conduct a safe rescue of the entire crew. But New Hope is just one of the many shipwrecks photographed by the underwater mission.